and thank you for tuning in to BEaTS Research Radio. For those that don't know us, we're a podcast and YouTube channel that try to open the doors to research to the community. My name is Janis Petït, and I'm back as your host for this episode. Today, we're joined by Alex Mihailidis. He is the Barbara G. Seniors Chair for Rehabilitation Technology and leads the Artificial Intelligence and Robotics team at KITE. He is also the Scientific Director at HWEL. His research focuses on supporting older adults to live more independently within their own homes and the community. And he has also recently been appointed to lead the development of a national standards for long-term care homes in Canada. So welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So as I said, you've recently been appointed to lead the development of a national standard for long-term care homes in Canada. Can you talk to us about your new role?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we all know what's been going on with the pandemic, and we know that the situation in long-term care homes has really been in the spotlight for very good reason in terms of what's been happening in these homes across the country, from coast to coast to coast, really. So, out of this, a big reason that we're seeing these things is there is a lack of standards. And there is a lack of understanding how these homes should be designed, what is required, particularly around infection prevention and control, or IPAC, right? And, in a lot of homes, because of the lack of those standards and methods and procedures, this is why we saw the spread of COVID throughout these homes. So, CSA Group, Canadian Standards Association, it's a well-known organization. They've written thousands of standards about pretty much everything. You look at the back of your bike helmet or your hockey helmet, you're going to see the CSA logo on there. They were tasked by our government, the federal government, to develop a standard like for any other thing they have, but specifically around long-term care homes. And so typically when they do standards for these kinds of projects or these types of facilities, the standard is very much about the infrastructure that's required. Anything from the heating, ventilation, air conditioning to air purification, air quality, as I said, infection prevention control, even then the design of the rooms, the hallways, the furniture, etc., in order to avoid a future pandemic or epidemic. Every year we go through flu season, and so even these standards can help there. So the work that I'll be doing with them is chairing the technical subcommittee. So this is a group that was selected from applications from any Canadian to join the group, and they will be the ones responsible for writing, developing what this standard should be in terms of, again, the facility with respect to long-term care homes. Now, the one thing I should also mention is there is a sister, so to speak, standard also being written by HSO. That's the Healthcare Standards Organization, and that's being led by Dr. Samir Sinha. And his standard is about the type of care that should be delivered and a standard for that. Now, we're working very close together, very much hand in hand, because as you can imagine, one's going to impact the other, right? So if his standard comes out and says, it should be one resident per room, then my standard needs to be able to design a facility that can do that. So.
It sounds like there is a lot to think about. I didn't even think about the structure of the rooms. Like that is also super important. What is the timeline on this? Like, when can we expect to kind of see these standards be implemented in Canada?
Yeah, so it's a very accelerated timeline. So a typical standard may take 3, 4, 5 years to go through the process. We have to have a standard in place pretty much from a year from now.
Wow.
So we've already started the work, and the one thing I should note is we also have actual residents from long-term care homes and caregivers as part of our work as well, guiding us and providing advice. We will have a draft version of the standard that will be up for public comment in early 2022. That gives, again, anyone the opportunity to take a look at the standard, provide their feedback, comments that we will address. And so then the hope after that is pretty much about 12 months from now, there'll be a standard out there. Now, the one thing to clarify, our standards are not enforceable. They're not mandatory in Canada. There are some standards that have been enforced because they've been legislated in some way. But typically a standard is written and then people refer to it as needed. Our hope is to actually go the route that these standards become mandatory across the country.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty necessary goal, I think. It would be very
Absolutely.
helpful. Um, so I'd love to talk about the research, the research that you've been doing. As I mentioned
Hmm.
earlier, you focus on supporting older adults and kind of help them live a more independent life. Can you talk to us about like the kind of technology that you develop within your
Hmm.
research so we can have a better idea of what that looks like?
Yeah. So I've been doing this work for almost 25 years now, including my graduate work in it. And it's really the focus of how do we keep older people at home longer, safer, as healthy and as well as possible, but really engaged, right? They need to continue to be engaged citizens, and that's a key thing that we look at as well. Um, we don't only look at older adults who are quote unquote healthy, but we also deal a lot with older people who may have dementia, Alzheimer's disease, other cognitive impairment as well, and try to keep them at home as well. So some of the typical technologies we focus on are things like smart home systems. Things like sensors in the home that can monitor activity levels, that can monitor different things such as, what tasks are they doing? Are they in the kitchen making a meal, or are they in the bathroom using, the sink to wash their hands or brush their teeth? Um, we then do a lot of work around artificial intelligence and machine learning to use that kind of data that these smart homes collect in order to do something with it, obviously. So we've developed, for example, models that can, classify what you're doing in the home, and then from that, kind of build a schedule of what your day looks like, right? And so you can imagine something like that being useful. That all of a sudden, this piece of technology is detecting that the person is now going to the bathroom twice as many times as they usually do, which may indicate something like a UTI, or perhaps that they haven't gone out of bed at their usual time, something's gone wrong, or things like they haven't gone in the kitchen and they're not hydrating properly, right? So we've done work like that to build those kinds of models, which are useful, but the ultimate goal that we're trying to work on is the prediction of these things, right? We want to predict if something bad is going to happen to the person before it actually happens, right? We want to predict if the person is going to have a cardiac event. We want to predict the person is going to fall at some point, and then put the right interventions in place before those things happen. So again, in the area of machine learning and artificial intelligence, we've been doing a lot of stuff around predictive algorithms. So again, for example, using similar data I described before collected by sensors in the home, we built a model that was able to predict with about 90% accuracy who was going to develop dementia. And that was just based on 3 months of data that we collected.
Wow.
Um, and even things like, again, looking at prediction of who's at high risk of falling, right? Now, again, one thing to mention is the goal of these technologies is not to diagnose any of these things, right? But again, to be a tool that the older person can use, that their families can use, their physicians or their care team can use, in addition to all their other tools that they're using to get this kind of information, right? So it's really just more to raise an alert, say, hey, we think there's something going on with your health. Why don't you give your doctor a call? And by the way, here's a printout of the data your house has just collected about you in a report that is readable by the doctor, by whoever it may be who's providing care to that person. Um, in terms of some other work we're doing, we're starting to look more heavily at robotics and the role of robots, one in the care and support of older people, and then two in rehabilitation, so stroke rehab, things like that, brain injury. In the first scenario, we're looking at robots that can provide socialization and support during common everyday tasks to older people. So just almost imagine a robot that doesn't follow you around the house, but when needed, comes to you and provides you that support. So in the case of a person with dementia, for example, they may walk into the bathroom to wash their hands and they completely forget why they're there. And so the robot understands this based on the sensors and the models that have been built, rolls itself over to the washroom, says, hey, Alex, have you washed your hands yet? And that's going to trigger me to do that. And then provides, step by step instructions as I need them. Right. And these are technologies that we built before already, in a project called the Coach, but now we're looking at the role of robots in that. And finally, in the area of rehab, looking at things such as robotics to be used during stroke rehab for upper and lower limbs, robotics in terms of cognitive therapy for people with brain injury and other things like that. So, that's really just the tip of the iceberg of projects I described to you. So, we have a whole host of other things going on that are all on my research lab's website. If people just want to search that up and take a look at the other things going on.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's very different from the button, the necklace on the buttons that calls emergency. I feel like it kind of prevents it, which is
Yeah,
what we want, right? We don't want to call for help. We want to hopefully prevent those things. So that's amazing.
yeah. Well, and, and,
Really
the, and the
interesting.
problem again, it's interesting you bring up the push buttons because, if you look at the most successful technology in the age tech marketplace, they would point to those systems and they probably still are, but they're the worst technologies ever, right? You talk to the companies and the companies themselves say, well, 75% of our clients actually never wear the button, right? And I think some like 85% of who wear the button never push in the case of an emergency. And there's a lot of issues there. There's usability issues, stigma issues, things like that. So, the technologies we're developing that are built into the home are meant to be more pervasive, but more natural in terms of their interfaces and the way they fit in someone's lifestyle.
That's very interesting. I wanted to know also, are you only targeting older adults, or are you also looking to help different kinds of people with different kinds of needs?
Yeah, it's mainly older adults, but we also look at their caregiver, their family caregivers as well, and how technology can help them. Years ago, your caregiver tended to be your spouse, and so typically it was an older person themselves. That's changing now. We're starting to see caregivers in their 20s, and many in their 30s, and many kind of in this sandwich generation, as it's called, where they're providing care to kids and they're also providing care to their parents as well. So that tends to get us a bit into the younger demographic. Many years ago, we tried to apply some of our smart home technology and robotics to kids with autism, which actually went very well and had some very positive results, but just wasn't an area that I continued the line of research in. So I would say it's mainly older people at this point.
Okay. Where do you see this artificial intelligence and robotics, like in the health and like wellness field? Like, where does it look like in the future? Maybe like 10, 15 years from now, or 5 years from now?
Yeah. Um, the thing is, you actually don't need to look into the future because these things are already here in our healthcare system, right? Artificial intelligence is being used all the time now in radiology, for example, and other areas of practice. Robotics are starting to roam the halls of hospitals, either doing disinfection or greeting people, or just trying to calm kids in the pediatric ward or hospital. So these things are here, but they're going to continue to grow, right? They're going to become more pervasive. They're going to become more commonplace in providing support to our healthcare system and our healthcare workers and the caregivers. Now, people always bring up this whole notion of, well, technology is going to replace all these people, and that's never going to happen. I don't think in my lifetime, and I'm much older than you are, so maybe in your lifetime, that I'm going to see these types of agents and robotics and algorithms replace, doctors and nurses, et cetera. You need that. You still need that one-to-one, person-to-person, approach in health. But again, these tools will be available to them to help them do their jobs better and more efficiently and effectively sometimes.
So we're not gonna be replaced by a bunch of robots in 10
No,
years.
I would love to be replaced by a robot and just have the robot go into the lab for me and everything else. But no, I don't. There's obviously going to be jobs that could be replaced by robotics and automation. Um, but they're not going to be, those frontline workers, right? So
I think I can agree with you.
yeah,
Um, so this seems like I think a research field that you seem really passionate about because you seem to be working kind of all the aspects of it, like in the technology with your research and also now with your new role for the national standard that you're developing.
yep.
So what made you pursue this career? Why did you decide on that field? Um, what was the what was it for you that made you decide on that?
Yeah, that's a good question because when I was in engineering, so I initially was in aerospace engineering, mechanical with a view towards aerospace engineering at U of T. I was kind of always the guy who said, once I'm done, I'm going to go work. I'm done with school, etc. And when I graduated, I did that, and I went to work in the automotive sector, which I absolutely hated because I had no contact with people, right? And I couldn't see or understand how my engineering skills were actually helping society at the end of the day, right? Um, so with that, basically, I decided to go back to grad school to do something different, and um, I met a potential supervisor, Dr. Jeff Fernie, at the U of T, and he was in the area of technology for older people, and I thought that was interesting, and in a demographic that I could relate to, with my own parents and grandparents and others, and obviously it's a big growing issue in Canada. So I decided to go under his supervision. Now, the thing is, at that point, Jeff was working on more mobility devices, wheelchairs, walkers, things like that. And I couldn't really find a project that I was interested in, right? And then what happened is we actually just had a random meeting, not really meeting, where we met someone in a restaurant slash bar at a conference, who was an engineer himself. So we started talking. Us engineers always gravitate to each other somehow. But we didn't talk about engineering. What we spoke about was the fact that his wife, this person we met, Robin, his wife had early onset Alzheimer's. She was in her early 50s only, but fairly moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease, and the role that he played as a caregiver, right? And he was telling us stories about how basically she can't remember to do her self care activities, etc. How he always had to stay with her to give her prompts and reminders of the things she had to do, and how difficult that situation was, and how how agitated she would become, and how embarrassed each of them would be in those more private situations where she couldn't remember the steps to complete. And as part of that conversation, he said, wouldn't it be great if computers could just do all this for us? Um, I didn't really think much about that statement at that time, but as I continued to think about my project, I started thinking about that. And I went to Jeff and I said, for my thesis, I want to develop a computer-based system that can provide prompts for older people with dementia. And Jeff, being as open as he is, said, "Sure, let's go for it." We had no skill set, no background whatsoever. I just came out of mechanical engineering, and also now I'm going into a more computer science based project. But from there, that was back in 1996, and at that point, we built the first system that applied some very basic artificial intelligence in a piece of technology that prompted older people through the task of washing their hands, right? And that project, the Coach project, even named back then, just kind of continued to roll on. And I started my research career still building that technology, but then from it, a lot of spin-offs came out of it, right? So that first technology we built and that we're still always working on really was the platform for everything that I led off. But it started with that just conversation that just came out of nowhere that got me into this area.
That's such a cool story I find to tell. Like that's such a not a random way, but it's such a unique way to figure out what you're gonna do for a big chunk of
Yeah,
your life. I think it's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
I want to close off with the last question. Could you give maybe some advice to someone that's trying to figure out what they want to do, what they want to accomplish with their life, and that's kind of
yeah.
confused? Because I think a lot of master PhD students are all kind of on the same boat.
Yeah. Well, I think building off the story I just told, never close yourself off to anything, right? You never know what opportunity is going to come up without you expecting it, and I've seen that happen over and over again in my career and with my grad students, the people that work for me, etc. Um, the other thing is you need to find something that you're going to be happy doing, you know. And I always say when a student comes into my office and says, I'm thinking about doing a PhD, the first question I ask them is, well, why? Uh, you know, well, why are you doing a PhD? Like, what do you want to do with it at the end of the day? And then when we talk about projects, the second thing I say is make sure you pick a project that you're going to be happy with because the next 4 to 5 years of your life is going to be focused on it every day, and every night possibly as well. And most likely, if you stay in academia, that's what you're going to be known for, and that's what you're going to build your career on. So be very careful in terms of the right project. And I made clear to them if I don't have the right project for you, I will not be offended if you move on to the next professor to see if you do, and that's really critical. And it's the same advice, even as a lot of my doctoral students, come close to completion and want to determine what they want to do. And, I say to them, if being an academic is not going to make you happy, then do not go into it because one, you're going to be miserable. And two, to be honestly, you're taking a position away from someone else who may want to be in there, especially these days where academic positions are getting sometimes tougher to get in various areas. So, you know, make sure that you're going to be happy with what you're doing, right? And that you're going to be passionate about what you're doing moving forward. Some more practical advice is talk to people, right? Talk to your supervisors, talk to other professors, talk to other graduate students. The peer support in academia is so important, right? People think about peer review, et cetera, as basically just the cornerstone of academia and the way that people really reject your papers and your grants. But that peer system in academia really can also have a very positive impact on people's lives. And a lot of times I have students, that say, well, I don't want to just email this professor out of the blue. But surprisingly, myself included, many of us actually enjoy getting those emails. Receiving just a thoughtful email from someone who, we may have never met before, but looking for advice or to have a quick meeting. You'd be amazed how many times we actually say yes to those things because that's what we're here for, right? Is to help train the future leaders in this area. So so don't be afraid to approach people and to ask that advice and ask those tough questions. So,
Good advice. Thank you so much. This concludes today's interview. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was great. I think we learned a lot about all the different things that you do because you seem to have a very busy schedule.
yeah. Well, thank you for
um,
having me.
of course. This is just a reminder that BEaTS research is supported by the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, BEaTS Research Lab, and the Department of Biochemistry, Microbiology, and Immunology of the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Ottawa. Our director is Dr. Emilio Alarcon. Thank you so much for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast, and follow us on Twitter for any other updates. Thank you, and see you on the next episode.